Now, I'm going to let John finish, but I had to stop and say how supremely arrogant this is. He cannot even fathom the possibility that Maduro can win the election because poor and working class Venezuelans actually support him. Or it couldn't be that the country's opposition is unpopular, weak, and wrought with sectarian infighting, as it is. No, it must just be that he's a dictator and he's bent the democratic process to his will. So Chavez was elected to power in 1999 on the basis of creating a new constitution. That's what he was voted for, and that's what he did when he was elected. When he took power, he started a process of drafting a new constitution. The way that this was done was millions of Venezuelans all across the country had mass meetings, discussions, debates, and proposed things to be in the constitution. Drafts of the constitution went out, people amended them, discussed them, debated them, and then ultimately this constitution, new constitution that was created organically and democratically by the people, was put to a national vote, and among the voters that came out, over 70% of voters approved this constitution. And Article 347 of that constitution that was democratically created and adopted reads as follows, quote, "The Venezuelan people are the depositary of the original constituent power. In the exercise of that power, it can convene a national constituent assembly with the purpose of transforming the state, creating a new legal system, and drafting a new constitution." And so the creation of this constituent assembly was completely within the bounds of the constitution that the people created and passed through a democratic vote in overwhelming numbers. And now the constituent assembly, as John Oliver likes to say, he just created it, stacked it with all his people, his relatives, and it was a sham vote. But the constituent assembly process was a democratic process that took many, many months and initiated a long, in-depth democratic process. I personally witnessed mass meetings that were held all across the country in the months in the lead up to the nomination of candidates and the election of people to the Constituent Assembly. Every citizen could go to meetings, understand what the Constituent Assembly was about, how to run, how to vote, and every citizen, everybody and anybody could run as delegates. The idea that Maduro stacked them with his own people, only Maduro people went, is a complete fabrication. Everybody and anybody was welcome to run as delegates, including the opposition, but the opposition refused to participate. In fact, the government wanted the Constituent Assembly to be a way for dialogue between the opposition and Chavistas. And the government actually begged opposition members to run for the Constituent Assembly, but they refused to take part in this process. So that's why there was mostly Maduro supporters. Of course, it wasn't all Maduro supporters who ran for the Constituent Assembly, but it was majority Maduro supporters because everyone who opposed Maduro refused to take part in the democratic process. And then a popular vote of 8 million people came out to elect delegates. There was over 6,000 candidates across the country, and 545 delegates were elected to this Constituent Assembly. The opposition National Assembly was in breach of Supreme Court rulings for the past 2 years and had not passed any legislation during that time. In particular, legislation necessary to resolve economic issues. You see why the government needed the Constituent Assembly to get around the National Assembly's blockade. Also, the National Assembly could have worked in tandem with the new Constituent Assembly, but they refused the offer. And third, the point of the Constituent Assembly and its task of changing the Constitution was to enshrine certain social and political rights that were not in the original Constitution. For example, a major sector who ran for the Assembly was activists and the LGBTQ community, so that rights for gay and trans people could be enshrined in the new Constitution. Same goes for environmental activists, who ran to ensure that rights for the planet were added to the Constitution. Very sinister stuff, huh? But mainly, this factor sought to enshrine many of the social missions that improve the lives of so many millions of people in ways that we've already covered. From housing to education, the opposition was very clear in saying that it wanted to eliminate these very popular programs that help millions and millions of poor people. So putting new protections in the Constitution would make that more difficult if the opposition were to take power. All of these things seem very reasonable, democratic, and constitutional. While the opposition was free and even encouraged to be part of it, they refused. They refused because they wanted the narrative to be exactly the one that John Oliver gave. A complete and utter lie to delegitimize a government that exercises far more democracy than the United States does.